Okay, I'm super excited about sharing these poems with you tonight. I love these two poets. They are probably poets you've never heard of unless you have done kind of a deep dive into British literature, Romantic literature, late eight, uh, 1700s, early 1800s. So these two poets are Lætitia Barbauld and Charlotte Smith. I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but Lætitia Barbauld was an inspiration to Coleridge and Wordsworth. Wordsworth, I believe it was Coleridge actually who gave her an early copy of one of his editions of one of his works. Just amazing writers, and you know, in the late 1700s, for a woman to be famous as a writer was considerable. And especially to get shout outs from not only people that we consider to be some of the great poets of antiquity, but who were famous poets at the time. You don't get more famous than Wordsworth or Coleridge. Okay. So this poem by Lætitia Barbauld is called To the Poor. And she was inspired by this poem by being so offended from hearing sermons degrading the poor and treating them as though their poverty was sinful. So she writes, Child of distress, who meetest the bitter scorn of fellow men, to happier prospects born, doomed art, and nature's various stores to see flow in full cups of joy, and not for thee, who seest the rich to heaven and fate resigned. Bear thy affliction with a patient mind, whose bursting heart disdains unjust control, who feelest oppression's iron in thy soul, who draggest the load of faint and feeble years, whose bread is anguish, and whose water tears. Bear thy wrongs, fulfill thy destined hour, bend thy meek neck beneath the foot of power. But when thou feelest the great deliverer nigh, and thy freed spirit mounting seeks the sky, let no vain fears thy parting hour molest, no whispered terrors shake thy quiet breast. Think not their threats can work thy fortune woe, nor deem thy Lord above like lords below. Safe in the bosom of that love repose, by whom the sun gives light, the ocean flows. Prepare to meet a Father undismayed, nor fear the God whom priests and kings have made. Oh, what a biting comment. Look to the God, the real Lord above, not like the lords on earth, and prepare to meet a Father undismayed, not like the God who priests and kings have made. Man, what a biting response to what she's seeing as the hypocrisy in the world and the church. Okay, another poem by Lætitia Barbauld is called Washing Day. It opens with, and their voice turning again towards childish treble pipes and whistles in its sound. That's a quote. The muses are turned gossips. They have lost the buskined step and clear high-sounding phrase, language of gods. Come then, domestic muse, in slipshod measure, loosely prattling on of farm or orchard, pleasant curds and cream, or drowning flies, or shoe lost in the mire by a little whispering boy with rueful face. Come, muse, and sing the dreaded washing day. Ye who beneath the yoke of wedlock bend, with bowed soul, full well ye ken the day which week, smooth sliding after week, brings on too soon. For to that day nor peace belongs, nor comfort. Ere the first gray streak of dawn, the red-armed washers come in chaste repose. Nor pleasant smile, nor quaint device of mirth, ere visited that day. The very cat from the wet kitchen, scared and reeking hearth, visits the parlor, an unwanted guest. The silent breakfast meal is soon dispatched, uninterrupted, save by anxious looks cast at the lowering sky, if sky should lower. From that last evil, oh, preserve us, heavens! For should the skies pour down a dew to all remains of quiet, Then expect to hear of sad disasters, dirt and gravel stains hard to efface, and loaded lines at once snapped short, and linen horse by dog thrown down, and all the petty miseries of life. Saints have been calm while stretched upon the rack, and Guatmazine smiled on burning coals, but never yet did a housewife notable greet with a smile a raining wash day. But grant, the welcome fare required not thou who callest thyself perchance the master there, or study swept, or nicely dusted coat, or usual attendance. Ask not indiscreet thy stockings mend, though the yawning rents gade wide as Erebus, nor hope to find some snug recess impervious. Shouldst thou try the accustomed garden walks? Thine eye shall rue the budding fragrance of thy tender shrubs, myrtle or rose, all crushed beneath the weight of coarse checked apron, with impatient hand twitched off when showers impend. Or crossing lines shall mar thy musings as the wet cold sheet flaps in thy face. Woe to the friend whose evil stars have urged him forth to claim on such a day the hospitable rights. Looks, blank at best, and stinted courtesy shall he receive. Vainly he feeds his hopes with dinner of roast chicken, savory pie, or tart or pudding. Pudding he nor tart that day shall eat. Nor, though the husband try, mending what can't be helped, to kindle mirth from cheer deficient, shall his consort's brow clear up propitious. The unlucky guest in silence dines, and early slinks away. I well remember when a child, the awe of this day struck into me, for then the maids, I scarce knew why, looked cross and drove me from them. Nor soft caress could I obtain, nor hope usual indulgences, jelly or creams, relique of costly suppers, and set by for me their petted one, or buttered toast when butter was forbid, or thrilling tale of ghost or witch or murder. So I went and sheltered me beside the parlor fire. There my dear grandmother, eldest of forms, tended the little ones and watched from harm, anxiously fond, though oft her spectacles with elfin cunning hid, and oft the pins drawn from her ravelled stocking might have soured one less indulgent. At intervals my mother's voice was heard, urging dispatch. Briskly the work went on, all hands employed to wash, to rinse, to wring, to fold, and starch, and clap, and iron, and plate. Then would I sit me down and ponder much why washings were. Sometimes through hollow bowl of pipe amused, we blew and sent aloft the floating bubbles, while dreaming then to see Montgolfier, thy silken ball, ride buoyant through the clouds. So near approach the sports of children and the toils of men. Earth, air, and sky, and ocean hath its bubbles, and verse is one of them, this most of all. I mean, laundry right now feels burdensome to have to, let me put my dirty clothes in the washing machine and then the dryer, and then oh my gosh, I have to fold them and hang them and put them away, and that just took a couple hours while I did things in between. What she describes here of washing day puts into such gross detail. Can you imagine, first of all, if you were a woman who was taught to read in this time period, and then secondly, to be able to read the account of almost making almost making heroic the work that you're doing, because it is heroic to run a household and to manage all those things, and to read your toils put into print like this would be so inspiring and encouraging. And I can only imagine some of the men that read this, but she talks about the fear of, oh my gosh, if it rains on laundry day, the trauma that inspires, or the toil and the pain of like the wind blowing the flapping wet sheets in your face, and the raw red arms. And then what if company shows up and you have to go and try to be nice and kind and welcome your company in and give them love and support and give them food, all the while you're supposed to be outside doing laundry. She kind of makes fun of that and light of that, and how quick and how little the food would be, and how anxious it would be for them to leave. And then the kids who were wanting to figure out what was such a big deal about this day. Anyways, beautiful poem. The next poem is called To a Little Invisible Being Who is Expected Soon to Become Visible. So again, we have a woman who's writing about pregnancy, writing about what women weren't supposed to be writing about and talking about. I mean, just up until the 1960s, if a woman was pregnant on TV, they would, write her out of the show or hide her behind things because we couldn't talk. When Lucille Ball was pregnant, that was like the first big, public pregnancy that was allowed to be shown on TV. So for her to write about this in the late 1700s, again, to put into words the experience of women in this time period was groundbreaking and very controversial. And she was not highly respected by some. But the thing about Romanticism is, remember, romantic does not mean, ooh, mushy gushy lovey dovey. Romantic means out of the box and creative. Like we said before, Frankenstein is considered a romantic novel. So it's very romantic that Lætitia Barbauld is writing about things like the poor, about washing day, and about being pregnant. I just love the first three lines of this poem. The first three words. 4. Germ of new life. Germ of new life, whose powers expanding slow for many a moon their full perfection wait. Haste, precious pledge of happy love, to go auspicious, born through life's mysterious gate. What power is life folded in thy curious frame, senses from objects locked, and mind from thought? How little canst thou guess thy lofty claim to grasp at all the worlds the Almighty wrought? And see the genial season's warmth to share, fresh younglings shoot, and opening roses glow. Swarms of new life exulting fill the air. Haste, infant bud of being, haste to blow. For thee the nurse prepares her lulling songs, the eager matrons count the lingering day. But far the most thy anxious parent longs on thy soft cheek a mother's kiss to lay. She only asks to lay her burden down, that her glad arms that burden may resume. And nature's sharpest pangs her wishes crown, that free thee from thy living tomb. She longs to fold her maternal breast, part of herself, yet to herself unknown, to see and to salute the stranger guest, fed with her life through many a tedious moon. Come, reap thy rich inheritance of love, bask in the fondness of a mother's eye. Nor wit nor eloquence her heart shall move like the first accents of thy feeble cry. Haste, little captive, burst thy prison doors, launch on the living world and spring to light. Nature for thee displays her various stores, opens her thousand inlets of delight. If charmed verse or muttered prayers had power with favoring spells to speed thee on thy way, anxious I'd bid my beads each passing hour, till thy wished smile thy mother's pangs o'erpay. I mean, what beautiful, inspired poetry, talking about the life growing within her, longing for this beautiful being to come out so she can meet it, talking about claiming the love that is yours, holding within the mother, holding within her arms this love that is within her growing, and how the nurses and the family is preparing for this child to be born. Lines 17 and 18, she only asks to lay her burden down, that her glad arms that burden may resume. Man, what beautiful imagery talking about that, of letting down the burden, giving birth to the child, and then lifting up the burden and holding the burden, holding the child. Free thee from thy living tomb. Thinking of the womb as a living tomb is incredible. She talks there, she longs to hold in her maternal breast part of herself, yet to herself unknown, part of herself that she's never met and doesn't know, to see and to salute the stranger guest, fed with her life through many a tedious moon. She is feeding this child through the life of herself and counting down the days, day after day after day. Come, reap thy rich inheritance of love. Haste, little captive, burst thy prison doors and launch onto the world and spring to light. Man, it's such a beautiful. And if prayer could get you here faster, I would pray my beads even more. Beautiful poem. Okay, now Charlotte Smith is a little bit different of a tone and perspective. Charlotte Smith lived quite a challenging life. At one point, her husband, she was hastened into marriage quickly by a young man who had an inheritance, but his father's will was so complicated that the litigation over this will lasted until after Charlotte and her husband died. And so they lived in poverty. And at one point, her husband, who was a philanderer and not faithful and not good with money, he ended up in debtor's prison. And at one point, Charlotte Smith had to go live in prison with him. When she was pregnant with their 12th child, they fled to France. And then at one point, she ended up leaving her husband and had to provide for herself and her children while paying alimony to her husband. So her poems have a little bit of a darker tone to them. One of the things that she does is she uses apostrophe, and apostrophe is where you speak to an inanimate object or a concept, and you personify it. So the first of her poems I'm going to read is called "To the Moon." Queen of the silver bow, by thy pale beam, alone and pensive, I delight to stray, and watch thy shadow trembling in the stream, or mark the floating clouds that cross the way. And while I gaze, thy mild and placid light sheds a soft calm upon my troubled breast. And oft I think, fair planet of the night, that in thy orb the wretched may have rest. The sufferers of the earth perhaps may go, released by death, to thy benignant sphere, and the sad children of despair and woe forget in thee their cup of sorrow here. Oh, that I soon may reach thy world serene, poor wearied pilgrim, in this toiling scene. The beauty and the comfort and the solace she finds in looking up at the moon. I imagine this mother of 12 kids toiling all day, and then once the kids are all in bed, wandering outside and just looking up at the moon, longing for the peace and the tranquility of the moon. Even a little bit of hint of longing for the peace and tranquility of not being alive anymore. Maybe there's some darkness there, but what a beautiful poem. Her next one, these are all sonnets. The next one is, oh, and by the way, Charlotte Smith was attributed with reviving the sonnet, that the sonnet had kind of gone by the wayside, and she brought it back. Sonnet, 14-line poem, specific rhyme scheme, and specific rhythm and meter. There are different types of sonnets. There's the Shakespearean sonnet or the Elizabethan sonnet. There's the Petrarchan sonnet or the French sonnet. But anyways, so this one is called "To Tranquility." In this tumultuous sphere, for thee unfit, how seldom art thou found, tranquility, unless 'tis when with mild and downcast eye by the low cradles thou delightest to sit of sleeping infants, watching the sweet breath, and bidding the sweet slumberers easy lie, or sometimes hanging o'er the bed of death, where the poor languid sufferer hopes to die. O beauteous sister of the halcyon peace, I sure shall find thee in that heavenly scene, where care and anguish shall their powers resign, where hope alike and vain regret shall cease, and memory, lost in happiness serene, repeat no more that misery has been mine. The juxtaposition of tranquility next to an infant's bed with those soft little breaths of sleep, or tranquility hovering over the bed of someone who is suffering and dying, longing for the tranquility. Beautiful. Okay, this next one, one of the things I love about this next poem is the ridiculously long title. I'm being cautioned against walking on an headland overlooking the sea because it was frequented by a lunatic. Don't go walk out onto that promontory because there's a crazy person out there. Is there a solitary wretch who hies to the tall cliff and starting pace or slow, and measuring views with wild and hollow eyes its distance from the waves that chide below. Who as the sea-born gale with frequent sighs chills his cold bed upon the mountain turf, with hoarse half-uttered lamentation lies murmuring responses to the dashing surf. In moody sadness on the giddy brink, I see him more with envy than with fear. He has no nice felicities that shrink from giant horrors. Wildly wandering here, he seems, uncursed with reason, not to know the depth or the duration of his woe. That's dark. She is admiring the freedom of the lunatic because he is not constrained by society's rules. He's not constrained by what people think he should do. He can just be himself and be free. Man, it's a powerful poem. And the last one, titled, the last one I'm going to read, it's called Written in the Churchyard at Middleton in Sussex. And she actually put a note on this poem herself. So her note says, Middleton is a village on the margin of the sea in Sussex, containing only 2 or 3 houses. There were formerly several acres of ground between its small church and the sea, which now, by its continual encroachments, approaches within a few feet of this half-ruined and humbled edifice. The wall, which once surrounded the churchyard, is entirely swept away, many of the graves broken up, and the remains of bodies interred washed into the sea, whence human bones are found among the sand and shingles on the shore. Pressed by the moon, mute arbitress of tides, while the loud equinox its power combines, the sea no more its swelling surges confines, but o'er the shrinking land sublimely rides. The wild blast, rising from the western cave, drives the huge billows from their heaving bed, tears from their grassy tombs the village dead, and breaks the silent Sabbath of the grave. With shells and seaweed mingled, on the shore, lo, their bones whiten in the frequent wave. But vain to them the winds and waters' grave. They hear the warring elements no more, while I am doomed by life's long storm oppressed to gaze with envy on their gloomy rest. So this graveyard has been ravaged by the encroachment of the sea. The tombs have been broken up, and the bodies and bones have been washed into the ocean, and they get washed back in. And as you're walking on this beach, you might come across the human remains, and she sees those human remains and is filled with envy at their gloomy rest because of the challenging life that she's had. Brilliant poems by brilliant masters of the word. So I hopefully have introduced you to these amazing poets that they have not been lost to history, but they are not as well known or well heard of as many of the other romantic poets or poets of the late 1700s or early 1800s. So go check out Lætitia Barbauld and Charlotte Smith.